This is an Introduction to English Grammar Part 13, Relative and Interrogative Pronouns. My name is Karen and this is for a class at the University of Utah. So today in this presentation we're going to talk about relative pronouns and relative clauses and then interrogative pronouns. So if you take a look at these sentences, here we have two different sentences that we can combine into a single sentence. The example is the boy is only 10 years old and the boy delivers the paper. There are a couple of different ways that we can combine this. What I'm looking for you to do is to combine this in the following manner. The boy who delivers the paper is only 10 years old. We're able to sort of embed one sentence into the other. And when we do that, we use what's called a relative pronoun. The who, in this case, is replacing one of the either the subject or the object. In this case, it's the subject of one of the sentences. So we're taking out one of the examples of the boy. Let's look at another example. If we take a look at number 2, and we combine these two sentences together, so the two sentences are, first, the girl will live with her grandparents, and second, the girl lost her father last week. If we combine these two into one sentence, it would be something like, the girl who lost her father last week will live with her grandparents. So you can see instead now of two the girls, or two subject noun phrases, we are replacing one of those with a relative pronoun. Remember, pronouns can stand in for nouns. Okay? If we look at the next one, number 3, the man is a doctor, I met the man. In this case, we have the man acting as both a subject in one place and an object in another. So if I combine these two, I'm going to say, the man I met is a doctor. We can actually just leave out the second, the man, or the object version, or we can use the objective relative pronoun and say, the man whom I met is a doctor. Okay, go ahead and try to do the other 3 on your own. Relative pronouns and relative clauses. We have to first understand what a relative clause is. A clause is a group of words that contain at least one subject and one verb. We'll learn more about clauses as we go into adjectives and adverbs, but for right now you can think of clauses as basically the same thing as a sentence. Relative clauses are clauses that modify nouns. So we've already learned about words that modify other words. So in this case, relative clauses are ones that modify nouns. So they're describing the noun. A relative clause is a clause that modifies the noun, and sometimes they're called adjective clauses because adjectives also modify nouns. Here's an example. We have a sentence, that's the beautiful woman. So in this case, our verb is contained inside the contraction that's. So that is the beautiful woman. We have both a subject and a verb. Okay? If we put it together like this, that's the woman who stole my car, we now have two different sort of subjects and two different verbs. Okay? We're going to talk about how we decide which one to use. So each relative clause contains a relative pronoun. The relative pronouns are who, which, whose, whom, and that. So in this case, we have that's the woman who stole my car. The relative pronoun ties the relative clause to the noun. So in this case, we have the noun, the woman, an object, and then we have who stole my car is describing that object, the woman. Relative pronouns are marked for animacy, or whether or not they're alive, whether they're human or not human, and for case. Okay? There's usually more than one relative pronoun that's allowed in the grammatical context. The choice is made based on style or register choices, so how formal or informal you are. Okay. When the relative pronoun is the subject of the relative clause, the choices are who, which, and that. Let's see some examples. Who is only for human subjects, and which is only for non-human subjects. Okay. We admired the boy who caught the fish. If I break this up into two different sentences, we have two sentences that look like we admired the boy caught the fish. So in this case, who is replacing the boy who caught the fish, so the subject of the second sentence. So we use the subjective case pronoun, which is who, Okay, here we have another. We admired the boy that caught the fish. We often can interchange that into many of these positions. Okay, tell if your mental grammar says that this one's okay. We admired the boy which caught the fish. My mental grammar says that that's not okay. And in this case, the reason why is because it's a human, the boy is a human, and we only use which when we're talking about things. Okay? That is the television that broke yesterday. That is the television which broke yesterday. Okay, again, non-human. And try this one on your mental grammar. That is the television who broke yesterday. It has some sort of weird meaning for me, like the television was a person with arms and legs. It doesn't work for my mental grammar. When we look at the objects are a little bit more tricky than the subjects. The relative pronouns that we can use when we're replacing the object in the clause are whom, who, that, and null. We can actually leave it out. So when we're deciding which to do, we have to ask ourselves about the objective case. So who, even though our mental grammar approves of it, is often incorrect prescriptively. Okay? Who and whom are only used for human objects. Here we have a sentence. The man whom she kissed is her father. Okay? We have two sentences if we break this apart. The first sentence is, she kissed her father. You can see that there. The second sentence is, the man is her father. So what we're doing here is we're actually taking away one of the objects or one of the instances of her father, and we're replacing it with whom. But it comes at the beginning when we use the relative pronoun. It comes at the beginning of that clause. So we have to say the man whom she kissed is her father. Okay? So ask yourself whether or not this one's okay. The man who she kissed is her father. For many of us, that's okay in our mental grammar, but it's actually not prescriptively acceptable. Okay? The man that she kissed is her father. For most of us, that one is okay. The man she kissed is her father. For most of us, that one's also okay if we just leave the relative pronoun out. Okay? One secret that I use when I'm trying to decide if it should be who or whom is that if I can leave the pronoun out, like in this sentence, the man she kissed is her father, then I know the correct prescriptive choice is the objective case, or the whom. If it must stay in, then I know that it's who and that it's replacing the subject. So the subject is required, but the object in the relative pronoun is not required. Okay? I saw the cookie that you took. I saw the cookie you took. Okay? I saw the cookie who you took. No, because in this case, we don't use who to describe something like a cookie because it's not human. Okay? Prescriptive rules say that whom is always the choice for objects. That's what you'll be graded on. But many native speakers think this sounds really formal. Native speakers often make the mistakes and they use who or whom in the incorrect places, demonstrating that that's not part of their mental grammar system. Okay, so if we see these same sentences again, I just want to remind you that the man whom she kissed is her father. It's often not part of people's mental grammar, but is prescriptively correct. And the man who she kissed is her father, which may be more acceptable to your mental grammar, is not actually prescriptively correct. Okay, let's take a look at possessives. So when we've looked at subjects, objects, and now we're going to look at possessives. When we're replacing something that it should be possessive, we use the relative pronoun whose. Okay, so the man's dog jumped my fence. Okay, or that's the man whose dog jumped my fence. So again, it's the man's dog that we're replacing, and so we're going to use a possessive, which in relative pronouns is whose. Okay. We've already seen this rule before, but I want to go over it one more time here with talking about our prepositions. Okay, so remember that prescriptive rules say that we should always move the preposition along with the relative word to the beginning of the relative clause. So we aren't supposed to end a sentence with a preposition, right? That's something like the original rule. In prescriptive lingo, we call that preposition stranding. Okay. Remember that this rule was created out of the prescriptivist love for Latin, in which prepositions always moved. However, English has its roots in Germanic languages, which allowed preposition stranding. So a Latin-like sentence would be something like, "That's the man for whom you wrote the report." "His left foot is the one about which PBS made a documentary." German-like sentences would be something like, "That's the man who you wrote the report for," which for most of us sounds much more pleasing to our mental grammar than the above Latin-like sentences. "His left foot is the one which PBS made a documentary about." Okay, again, so we've got the words for and about, which our prescriptive rules say that we shouldn't leave there at the end. Okay. An overzealous editor once attempted to rearrange one of Winston Churchill's sentences, and he was upset over this, and so he scribbled a single sentence in reply. He said, "This is the sort of bloody nonsense up with which I will not put," trying to show them how ridiculous it was to try to move all of the prepositions, instead of him saying something like, I will not put up with that, or "I will not put up with it." Right? So he moved his prepositions to the beginning to show them how ridiculous that was. Okay, further prescription about relative clauses. You need to understand that many professors who are educated in English grammar or who really care about their writing will want you to use whom in the appropriate places. Remember, one way for us to decide whether it's who or whom is to see if we can leave it out. If we can leave it out, then it should be whom. Okay, and we should also avoid that preposition stranding. Now, when we move the preposition, the relative pronoun becomes an object of a preposition and must take objective case. Okay? However, other professors may not care about this because that's not what they're focusing on in their writing. Okay? They won't be too worried about the formal thing there. So you want to double check with your professor to see which way they prefer. Okay, so some people say we should always put in relative pronouns. Other prescriptivists say that we should remove unnecessary words. So anytime you use that, but you can take it out, you should. So you want to double check with your professor and make sure what their rule is it. Okay. From your textbook, we have some sentences. Let's try to figure out whether it should be who or whom. So in this sentence, the dancer blank fell will be out of the show. Remember, my way to tell is that I try to leave out the relative clause word or the relative pronoun to see if it still makes sense. If it makes sense, then it's whom. So if I can say the dancer fell will be out of the show, my mental grammar says no. So that tells me that it should be who. The dancer who fell will be out of the show. Okay? We respect the people blank you have chosen. We respect the people you have chosen. Yep, I can do that one without a relative pronoun, and so that tells me it should be whom. We respect the people whom you have chosen. Okay? The woman sold me this blouse works in another department now. The correct answer here is who. The woman who sold me this blouse works in another department now. I pity the person whom they convicted. Okay. I pity the person who they convicted. Let's see if I can leave one out there. I pity the person they convicted. Yep, I can leave that one out. So the correct prescriptive answer is whom. Let me be the one blank congratulates you first. In this case, it must stay in, which means that it's replacing the subject, and so should be the relative pronoun who. Okay. One oddity of relative pronouns is that we don't have a non-human possessive pronoun that's similar to whose. So prescriptive rules say that whose should only be applied to humans, which can be a non-human subject or object, but not a possessive. So when we have something and we want to say it as a relative clause construction, here's our example. I found the book's cover is torn. And we have to try to decide how are we going to put this together. We saw before that we used whose to replace the subject when it was possessive, but in this case where we have a non-human, it gets a little bit tricky. So here are some options. I can say something like, the cover of the book that I found is torn. I found the book with the torn cover. I found the book, the cover of which is torn. Okay. I found the book whose cover is torn. For my mental grammar, I'm actually okay to use whose to describe things that are not human. But for many people, that's not an acceptable form for them. Here are some example sentences from our textbook. Take a look and see if you can figure out how to ask questions about the underlined noun phrase. So in the first one, I met a clerk at the bank. How could I ask about the clerk? I could ask about the clerk by saying, who did you meet at the bank? Or who did I meet at the bank? Okay. How about in the second one, the dog bit the little girl? We can either ask about the dog, we could say, what bit the little girl? Or we can ask about the little girl, whom did the dog bite? Okay. So as we're trying to decide whether we use who or whom, it has to do with whether we are questioning about the subject or about the object. Okay. Go ahead and try to figure out how to ask questions about the rest of the sentences. Okay. When we're figuring out how to ask these questions, this is where we use what's called interrogative pronouns. So we saw pronouns that looked exactly the same shape, but the behavior was different when they were behaving as relative pronouns. In this case, they're behaving as interrogative pronouns because they're related to asking questions. Okay. These are the words that are used to stand in for the information we're trying to learn. So when I said, or what bit the little girl, I'm trying to learn about the dog. So I'm questioning with the word what to try to find out about the girl and who or what bit her. Okay? They're very similar to relative pronouns, but they're found in questions instead of declarative statements. So see if you can come up with what these interrogatives do. Okay, so I'm going to give you a list of interrogatives: who, what, whom, whose, and which. And I want you to see if you can figure out what is it asking about. Okay, so is it asking about humans, non-humans, living things, non-living things? Then try to figure out what grammatical positions it takes. And if you can, try to think of up a sentence where you would use it. Okay, that will tell you the grammatical information. Go ahead and pause the video while you try to work on that. Okay, there are some rules about using relative pronouns, and there are some prescription use about interrogative pronouns as well. The prescriptive rules also consider who and whom, again taking a look at whether they're the object or the subject. However, this distinction is lost in many people's natural grammatical systems, meaning your mental grammar. People tend to overuse whom where it really doesn't belong. So if I want to sound very formal, I might use whom even though it should be who. So here's an example. Whom shall I say is calling? Okay, again, sounds very formal. If we dissect the sentence into its parts, we might see, though, that we're replacing the wrong part. So if we break this up into the sentences, we have the sentences, I shall say, and blank is calling. So in this case, we're replacing the subject and not the object. So it should be who. Who shall I say is calling? Or I shall say who is calling. Okay. Okay, this part gets a little bit tricky, but again, you're just trying to figure out which part are we questioning about, and then we can determine whether it should be subject or object case. Another thing that we need to make sure we understand just very shortly is about universal and indefinite pronouns. Okay, this is a pretty easy explanation because we've seen it when we've looked at nouns and pronouns already. Okay, universal pronouns are like all, each, everybody, everyone, everything. Indefinite pronouns are some, any, someone, somebody, anyone, anybody, anything, many, several, enough, few, less, one, none. None actually means not one, and so when you're trying to figure out subject-verb agreement, think of none as not one. So here are some examples where we would use these. All of the people clap their hands. All of the newspaper was soaked. Some of the water is gone. Some of the beads are missing. So here we have pronouns that are being replaced, and we have to fill in that place with a universal or an indefinite word. So what we've seen in today's presentation is that relative clauses use relative words called relative pronouns. And prescriptions about relative pronoun usage vary widely. So you want to make sure that you check with your style guide or your professor to make your decision on how strictly you need to follow those prescriptive rules. Okay? Interrogative pronouns are just like relative pronouns, but they are asking a question, and just like relative pronouns, they're subject to hypercorrection, or people trying to sound more formal than they are by using the incorrect form when they think that must be the correct form.